The National Centers for Disease Control recently labeled the maltreatment of children as a substantial public health problem, with an estimated 905,000 cases in the U.S. in 2006. In California, as recently as 2008, there were more than 700,000 referrals for investigation of child abuse and neglect, involving nearly 500,000 children. These statistics are staggering. Children are our most vital resource, yet we fail to protect them, and child abuse and neglect are increasing at an alarming rate. What can be done? More importantly, what must be done?
In 1874, the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was formed, the first organization of its kind, as a direct result of a legal case in which Mary Ellen Wilson was removed from an abusive foster home. The case was brought, argued, and won by the founder, an investigator, and the attorney for the American Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. But it wasn't until the 1960s that child abuse was formally identified as a social problem with devastating dimensions. California's first child abuse reporting law went into effect in 1963. In 1965, the National Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act became law and provided funds to states that met the law's mandate for reporting child abuse and neglect. By 1967, all 50 states had adopted some form of legislation requiring professionals to report suspected child abuse. Because of this legislation, child abuse reporting laws now provide definitions, procedures, lists of mandated reporters, liability for failure to report, legal protections for reporters. But despite all of the laws, child abuse still occurs.
Remember, child abuse has no socioeconomic boundaries, racial boundaries, cultural boundaries. It happens across the board in every neighborhood, in every community.
I think the most important thing is to err on the side of caution with this. We want to be protectors of the children. We don't want to let something go kind of under the radar screen. If we see it, we think the thought, we owe it to the child to get it investigated.
Before we can stop child abuse, we must first identify what child abuse is. Then, armed with this knowledge, we can prevent it. There are different types of child abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect.
We all have a moral responsibility to report suspected child abuse, but for some of us there are legal requirements as well. The Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act requires certain professionals and laypersons who have a special working relationship or regular contact with children to report known or suspected child abuse to the proper authorities. Many times, such mandated reporters are the first line of defense for the children and families affected by child abuse and neglect.
Anyone who suspects that a child is being neglected or abused should call someone. Whether you're a mandatory reporter or not, you should call someone. Whether it be a friend who maybe knows a little bit more about it, or a law enforcement agency, or even CPS, it should never go without being reported.
There are two types of reporters: mandated reporters and discretionary reporters. Mandated reporters are those required by law to report knowledge and reasonable suspicion of child abuse. Mandated reporters have a legal duty to report and can be held liable for failure to report. If you are a mandated reporter, you have immunity from legal action against you relating to child abuse reporting when on the job or acting in your professional capacity. Discretionary reporters are those who report simply because they develop a concern for a child's welfare, such as neighbors, store owners, relatives, and so on. Discretionary reporters do not have a legal responsibility to report and cannot be held liable for failure to report. But like mandated reporters, discretionary reporters also have immunity from legal actions against them.
It's important that everyone helps out with this process. You don't have to be a mandatory reporter by law to assist law enforcement in helping these children. We encourage anyone in the public. I mean, we have the teachers, the doctors, and other mandatory reporters at the hospitals and things like that, but just average everyday citizens, neighbors, if your children tell you something that they're concerned about for a friend of theirs, you should always listen to them and call the police if you have any kind of suspicion of it.
There are currently 37 categories of mandated reporters under California law, including health practitioners, teachers and teacher aides, child care custodians, employees of child protective agencies, commercial film and photo print processors, clergy, firefighters, animal control and humane society officers, child visitation monitors, in-home support service staff, alcohol and other drug counselors, and court-appointed special advocates. If you are a mandated reporter, your duty to report is not an option. It's the law. The two circumstances under which reporting is required are knowledge of abuse or neglect, actual observation of child abuse or neglect, or information obtained directly from an abused child. Reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, concern that a child is being abused or neglected based on facts that could lead to a reasonable person with his or her training and experience to suspect it. As a mandated reporter, you're legally required to report if you have knowledge or reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect and obtain this knowledge during the course of your work or in your professional capacity. Remember, you're not required to prove the abuse or collect evidence.
These are very delicate personal issues that are best left to professionals that are trained to investigate, law enforcement or child protective services.
You are not legally obligated to report if the knowledge or suspicion of abuse or neglect did not come to your attention in your professional capacity. You are not empowered to investigate the complaint and should not do so.
That's all it is. It's just reporting. I have a suspicion, a red light went off, I heard a ding in my head that there's something about this situation that's not right. And then put it in the hands of all the other authorities, all the other responsible people that are going to do that next step. And they don't necessarily have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about being liable. All they do is sleep well at night knowing they did what they needed to do.